Everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcavage. We're back for another edition of the Thyroid Answers podcast. And at this episode, I have a returning guest. His name is Jeff Thurston. He's a friend. He's a colleague. He is the owner of Master Supplements and US Enzymes. I would say, he may argue with me that he doesn't like the term, but I would say he is an expert in what goes on in the gut, especially in the world of bacteria. And he is my go-to guy when I have questions about bacteria and dysbiosis in the gut. He's the guy that I reach out to. So, Jeff, welcome back to the Thyroid Answers podcast.
It is always good to be here. You always ask the challenging questions.
I will probably ask some more today for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So some people may not know who you are, but I always like to start with just a brief introduction of who you are and why people should listen to you as we talk about this topic today.
Well, I put it kind of this way, because as old as I am, I graduated from college in the middle of the draft. And people don't even know what that is anymore. I know. When they said you're going, they just picked you up and said you're going. Particularly at the time it was Vietnam, and so continuing education was really not the option that it is today. So you got your degree and you got drafted, or you got a number that didn't allow you to be drafted, what have you. And I was kind of lucky in certain regards, so I didn't end up getting drafted. But that just put me into a mode where an advanced degree was not really ever going to be an option for me. So my whole thing is all experience. From starting out working in a lab and ending up owning a probiotic company, it's always been bacteria and other organisms. Even to today, it's the same thing. It hasn't really changed. So it's 50 odd years of experience, almost 60.
Okay. Well, you're doing a good job. And for those who don't know, he's got his Master Supplements company is a probiotic based company, and a number of years ago purchased US Enzymes, which is an enzyme based company. And I use those products almost every day with clients. So some great products. But I brought Jeff on because right now there's this phenomenon going on with the use of GLP-1 medications, and I wanted to have a conversation with him because a lot of people don't know that GLP-1 is a hormone that's made in the body. We make it. And so everybody's taking this in an effort to try and lose weight. And there's a story about what we call endogenous, the GLP-1 that you make in your body, and why either you don't have appropriate levels or it's not working appropriately. And there's a huge tie to what's going on in your gut and with the bacteria in your gut. And I wanted to bring Jeff in to kind of have that discussion. There's a massive tie to what other things I talk about, the cell danger response, thyroid allostasis, and the shift in how we regulate thyroid hormone. And I'll probably get more. I'll touch on it a little bit in this discussion probably, but I'll do a Thyroid Answers shorts just on this topic where I can just beat this up about thyroid physiology, the role it plays, and the potential consequences of adding thyroid hormone inappropriately to optimize labs, and how it can be more destructive to your gut issues, your dysbiosis issues, and your GLP-1 signaling. So stay tuned for that. But Jeff, let's get into it. What's GLP-1? Where does it come from? And what does it do in somebody who's in a healthy homeostatic state?
Well, GLP-1, either endogenous and exogenous forms, are they're going to help manage insulin primarily. I mean, that's, it's going to have some effect on satiety and stomach emptying and things of that sort. But it's mostly about managing glucose and insulin. And of course, that leads all the way down to T3 and T4 and everything else. It's all interconnected. And to me, it's it's a much bigger thing. But to answer the specific question, GLP-1 is made in the cells by the human body, right? And it's primarily as a result of short chain fatty acids. How they they work for us. And short chain fatty acids are in part coming from the beneficial bacteria and in large part from probiotics you might be taking in the colon. So, you've got this is a natural body way of doing things. But if you have dysbiosis, and there's a lot these days, I'll put it that way, of low bifidobacteria counts in the human population. And that causes a ripple effect of a lot of things.
All right. So I'm going to give a little bit of background here too, and then we'll dive into the bacteria. So when you have healthy gut biome, and you jump in there if I say something incorrect, when you have healthy gut flora in your gut, you're eating healthy, whole food based diet. You're eating foods that are going to feed what we call commensal bacteria that should be in the GI tract. They can produce things like short chain fatty acids and other ingredients that help what we call the intestinal L cells make GLP-1. Thyroid hormone also plays a big role there because you need T3 in those intestinal L cells to drive the mitochondria to make GLP-1. Okay. So really important that we have a balance there. When somebody eats, within minutes of starting to put nutrition into the body, the intestinal L cells get a signal and they start releasing GLP-1. GLP-1 then goes to your pancreas and says, hey, pancreas, food's coming in, glucose is coming in, and we get a release of insulin from your pancreas. It's called your first phase insulin response. It's about 50% of the insulin that's produced through a meal is produced in that first phase insulin response. And that's what prevents us from having these really high spikes of glucose, because what that GLP-1 does is it stimulates the release of preformed insulin from the pancreas, and it also inhibits glucagon from driving the liver, and glucagon helps the liver release glucose. So essentially the pancreas is sending glucagon to the liver and saying, hey, you don't need to make any more glucose right now because we got glucose coming in. Because if you didn't do that, and it happens with people who have problems with GLP-1, is that they're eating food, they're getting glucose into the bloodstream, and the liver's pumping out glucose, and now you have high blood sugar.
High glucose, yeah.
Right? And then when the glucose is high and there isn't insulin to get it into the cell, it's staying high. It's not really what we want. It creates an issue. Now the body starts to say, hey, I got to do something with this stuff. Now we have to start kind of funneling and trying to shunt it into tissues and if there's not enough insulin to do it, the primary tissues that are going to get it are the ones that don't necessarily require as much insulin to do it. And we can use what they're called glucose 2 transporters to force that glucose into tissue. And that tissue that has a lot of those glucose 2 transporters, liver uses it to exit glucose, but the adipose tissues have it to allow for excess glucose to come into the cell. Now the glucose is going down. Now you get what we call your second phase insulin response, which can be generated by the pancreas while we're eating. And that a lot of times you get a jump in insulin, but the glucose is already on its way down, and now blood sugar crashes. And this is when we talk, a lot of times when people say, they get reactive hypoglycemia, like their blood sugar drops too low, and it's alterations in here. So GLP-1 and the production of GLP-1, really important to regulate blood glucose regulation. And it does a bunch of other things, but the role of the bacteria in this, you kind of hinted at this. There are some strains of commensal bacteria that are really important in regulating GLP-1. And you started to talk about those strains that are really important to it. What are some of the more important types of commensal bacteria that are involved in helping supporting GLP-1 production?
Okay, so I'm just going to use a little story. There's a product called partially hydrolyzed guar gum that says that if you take it, if you're healthy and you take it, you will double your bifidobacteria counts and you will increase your butyrate levels,
Mm-hmm.
which is a short chain fatty acid.
Right.
But if you take the sugar out of MRS broth and you put that in as a substitute, bifidobacteria won't grow. So some other commensal organism has to work on that partially hydrolyzed guar gum so bifidobacteria can then utilize it. Bifidobacteria make lactate. Lactate is converted to butyrate by eubacteria, Clostridia, Roseburia, and other organisms, but only at the proper pH. If the pH is too low, it doesn't get converted to butyrate. So what you're looking at here is you're saying, okay, the key thing here are the bifidobacteria, but their food source has to be worked on by somebody else, and then what they produce has to be worked on by somebody else. So it's like the rainforest in the Amazon. It's an ecosystem that requires everything there to be working properly. All right, so we can talk about specific bifidobacteria strains and everything else, but you have to have all these other commensal organisms there to help the system work properly. And that all then comes from food, the food that you eat.
So is it fair to say that somebody who has problems with glucose regulation, glucose resistance, I like that term better than insulin resistance, likely has some problems with their commensal bacteria balance already?
Yes. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that the amount of this is going, of glucose resistance going up or down over the last 40 years?
I know glucose resistance is going up. We've got, I think the last statistics I saw was that 50 to 70% of the US population is either overweight or obese. And there's a significant, I think it was pushing 40 or 50% of the US population is on some type of glucose regulation medication.
Right. And so why do you think this is happening? My opinion is it's all about the food that we eat.
Well, I think the food contributes a huge deal. I overall, if I had to give an answer, I would say it's an excessive stress load on the physiology, and the food contributes to a large part of that. And we've talked about this before. And in my book, The Thyroid Debacle, I laid out like 10 fitness factors that I think contribute. Now I'm up to 18 fitness factors, from mindset fitness, dietary fitness, respiratory fitness. Like, there's so many factors, and it's not that. And I just think the load is greater today on our physiology than ever, and it's contributing to problems. But food, for sure, has a massive impact on what's creating the problem.
Because even the bacteria in your gut have to eat. Just put it in those terms, right? And if you give it a high carbohydrate, high sugar, high seed oil kind of a diet, you're going to feed the wrong guys, right? So you know that story of the good wolf and the bad wolf. You know which one survives. It's the one that you feed. So if you have two strains of bacteria, and you give one the food that it needs and the other one doesn't, which one's going to do better? The one that you're feeding.
Yeah.
Correct. So again, so whatever's going on in your GI tract is a function of the inputs that you're putting in there. And if those inputs are so deficient in minerals anymore, it doesn't matter what you're eating. You're not getting the minerals you need in the food that you need to make things work. So one's a quick example. If back in the 1950s, 100, don't hold me to these numbers, but 100 grams of spinach had 150 micrograms of iron. Today, that same amount of spinach has 3, right? So if Popeye was eating that spinach, his arms would look like mine, not like yours. So, so we don't have the food source that's giving the right bacteria the right foods for them to thrive. and you're feeding the antagonist, in the story here. So to me, whatever we're doing in the gut, we can supplement, we can do a lot of different things, but it still comes down to if somebody's drinking sugary drinks and processed foods, I don't think you're going to find any way to get them better.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like to start improving gut function, glucose regulation, GLP-1 signaling, there are foundational things that have to be done. And to me, I break those, what I call my foundational 5. Your mindset is huge, right? Because if you're a person who perceives a lot of threat or danger between your work, your life, your relationships, if that noise in between the 6 inches of your ears is more negative, what does that do to your brain? It upregulates your sympathetic nervous system, upregulates your limbic system, downregulates your parasympathetic nervous system. And so now you're going to have reduced digestive enzyme capacity, reduced stomach acid production. It's going to create changes in GI physiology that's going to potentially lead to more bad guys thriving and more bad guys thriving and fewer good guys. And I think the term is, I don't know how to say the term right. The bacteria in the gut is all supposed to be there, right? It's all commensal. It's just that and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I like explain it like my neighbors, right? My neighbor, Joe, he's supposed to be there, right? It's his house, right? All my neighbors are supposed to be there. But if Joe invites like 50 of his relatives to come stay and live at the house for a week and just party, it's Joe's house. He has a right to be there, but it's going to create a problem. And the same thing if we feed poor nutrition to the body, right, then that can lead to some of the commensal bacteria that are okay in small numbers, but more problematic in large numbers. Does that make sense? Or
sure, exactly. And that's basically what I'm saying is that if you are feeding Joe and Eric's not getting food, Joe's going to have the strength to carry on, if you will. And you're just going to have to put up with it, right? But if you can feed you, then you get a little bit stronger. You can say, hey, Joe, can you just keep it down to 30 people instead of 50? You can do what you need to do. But the different bacteria and it produce different cytokines, different chemokines, each one, right? So if you look at bifidobacteria as a group, right, there are going to be certain things that they're going to do that Clostridia is not going to be able to do. They're going to be very impactful in producing short chain fatty acids. So will fecal bacterium Prosnitzia, another significant butyrate producer. And these GLP-1s are coming from, the basis of that is the short chain fatty acid production in the gut. That's the really pretty much, to me, the bottom line. So if you have good short chain fatty acids, all these other things are going to happen. Going up and down the line, you're going to have increased motility. You're going to have better satiety. You're going to have more acetate. You're going to have more butyrate. You're going to have a downregulating glucose, IL-6. You're going to have less TNF-alpha, CRP. All these things can come from the bifidobacteria, right? Just in the gut.
Yeah. So I want to jump back to that, but I want to finish the point. So those five foundational things: mindset, fitness, right? Habits. And this ties into what do we eat? When do we eat? All those things, right? Sleep fitness is critical because if you don't get good quality sleep, nothing works really well. Nothing can recover really well. Physical fitness is really important in dietary fitness. So those are my foundational 5 things that everybody needs to work on foundationally. But diet's huge. So if somebody is struggling with their blood glucose and blood sugar signaling, and we are in some level, I think we're in agreement that if they have problems with glucose resistance, insulin resistance, weight gain, there's likely a problem within the gut, what we call dysbiosis. Because of that dysbiosis, there's likely to be more inflammation, low-grade inflammatory changes going on there. That's going to alter for all the thyroid people. That's going to alter T4 to T3 conversion directly in that in the GI tract and potentially systemically, potentially leading to more thyroiditis. That too is going to alter GLP-1 production. There's so many factors here that are going to have an impact on it. But somebody might start to hear this conversation and say, well, if it's dysbiosis and it's bacteria, I'm just going to buy a probiotic and that should fix it, right?
No. I mean, as much as I would like to say, yes, this is the answer to everything that all the problems in the world are, and my company would just explode. No, it's not true. It's, everything needs to be in a balance. Everything, from zinc and copper to lactobacillus and bifidobacteria, Clostridia, rosebury, all these things need to be in balance. And when things get out of balance, we get into trouble, right? And so in the microbiome, it's the same thing. But you have, in most of your biological activities in the last third of the small intestine, first third of the colon, right? And they're different. So the bacteria in the small intestine can utilize oxygen, and the ones in the colon don't, right? That's an anaerobic environment. So you've got two environments. So you have two different kinds of probiotics in the first place. Ones that are going to work in the small intestine, and ones that are going to work in the colon. Well, there's a third. There's the facultative ones that'll do both, right? Right. So just taking a probiotic is fine. You're going to get down there. You're going to get a real short-term change or whatever. But if you don't change the other factors that you just mentioned, they're not going to thrive. They're not going to get a chance to do anything. Probiotics are really, Randy used to use this. He used to say they're the police. You take them, they go down there, they fix the problem, and then you're supposed to take care of it on your own after that. It's like you have a riot and 1,000 people are rioting. They don't send in 1,000, military guys, they send in 10, right? And they put things back in order, and that's what can happen. But if you walk away and stop and eat junk food, the problem is not going to stop. So if you really want to change things, you have to change your mindset. You really do. I mean, that's where it has to start. You have to be willing to change your habits.
So it's a huge issue because we got so many people overweight. We tend to eat more processed food. For the person who's struggling with weight issues, blood sugar issues, and they're potentially considering, like, should I do one of these drugs? I saw Susie lost like 40 pounds in like 2 months to being on the medication. That's a strategy. It's a management strategy. It's not a corrective strategy. It's not a recovery strategy necessarily. But what are the things? Let's start with nutrition. Like, what are the recommendations if there's commensal bacteria there that help generate GLP-1? What is the best diet, from your opinion, that somebody should consume to help feed the appropriate bacteria? Because we've got a lot of diet wars going on right now. Vegan versus carnivore versus keto. Like, everybody's got the diet that helped them, and now they're making it into the thing that everybody should do. But they're strategies, but they're not long-term solutions. So what's the best, starting with the diet, what's the most important foods that need to be consumed to help support healthy gut flora, commensal bacteria, and especially those ones that are going to help with GLP-1 signaling?
Okay, so we're going to talk then primarily the colon. All right, because that's where most of this activity is going to be happening. Right. What happens to fiber, first of all?
Well, people say fiber's bad, Jeff.
Oh yeah, fiber is really bad. Human beings don't make enzymes to break down fiber. But it's supposed to be the largest part of the diet that we eat, right? But we don't make the enzymes to break it down. And if you eat a varied diet of fibers, there may be as many as 10,000 fiber combinations that we eat typically. And an enzyme has to function like this. It fits right in. If it's like this, it doesn't work, right? And if you put an extra chain in here, this enzyme's not going to work. So you may need as many as 6,000 enzymes to break down the fiber that you're eating. So, and that's the food that feeds the bacteria in the colon, because fiber gets all the way through your small intestine untouched. So the fiber is food for the colonic microbiome. And the greater the variety of fibers you eat, the greater the variety of organisms that are going to thrive. And a very simple thing that I read a couple of months ago, Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, the ratio will increase if you eat apple pectin, it will decrease if you eat orange pectin. So just those little tiny changes can make all the difference in just those little variations of what's going on in the colon, which can give rise to, you have to have the proper pH. Like I was saying before, if the pH is too low, you're not going to get conversion of lactate to butyrate in the colon. That has to happen.
Even if you eat even if you're eating the fibers.
But if it's too low, and what's going to lower the pH? Sugary foods are going to lower pH. A lot of proteins can lower pH, but proteins shouldn't make it into the colon. They should be all absorbed by the time they get there. So you're going to go from your mouth, where you start to produce amylase, those enzymes, all the way down through to the end of the day. When you excrete the food, enzymes are working on your food all the time, but there's certain areas where they work best. And there's two places where bicarbonate comes into the system. One is after the pancreas and the gallbladder, and the other one is about maybe a third of the way into the small intestine, or the colon, right? So now the pH is going to go up, and that's where it's going to work. If that system isn't working, guess what? You're not going to have the right pH, and you're not going to get the conversion of lactate to butyrate. And if you don't have prebiotics there, you're not going to have that conversion. So it comes down to me, if you are really looking for good colonic health, fiber is critical to have that.
And there's an argument, and we might as well talk about it now, that fiber is problematic. It creates issues for people. Gas, bloating, pressure, therefore it's not good. That's part of the carnivore community, as much as I'm a meat eater, kind of uses that nobody needs fiber. I don't know that that's necessarily true, but there's an argument that we don't need it, or it's unhealthy for us. I think what you're making an argument that it is healthy for us, but somebody may be listening to this and saying, well, when I eat fiber, I get gassy, I get bloated, I don't feel good. So obviously it's probably not good for me. Why might somebody, if fiber is really good for us, why would a community like the carnivore community say it's not? And two, why would people have signs and symptoms of GI dysfunction when they start to consume fiber?
Okay, so I can see both sides of the argument, by the way, because going back to, not prehistoric time, but, prior to the invention of cars and things of that sort, right? When you saw guys out with bows and arrows, hunting, they weren't hunting broccoli, they were hunting animals, and they were getting their minerals from the animals that ate the fiber, to feed them. They weren't doing much. Then all of a sudden we started growing corn, and, the Native Americans and other indigenous peoples figured out ways to grow foods that they could utilize themselves and store, right? So I can see that side on the carnivore side. But on the other side, there's two kinds of fiber. There's soluble fiber and there's insoluble fiber. Insoluble fiber is just bulk in the stool, right? And if, there's too much of that, then I can see where constipation could be an issue for some people, because there's just, so much bulk there, right? But if you're looking at soluble fibers, without getting overly technical, let's look at molecular weights. FOS, a lot of people have heard about fructooligosaccharides, how it's a great prebiotic, it feeds probiotic bacteria, yada, yada. Well, it has a very low molecular weight, so it will feed a lot of different organisms. And some of those organisms are gas producers. And if you're feeding the gas producers, guess what? They're going to produce more gas, and you're going to get that gas and bloating and that uncomfortable feeling in your gut. So if you go up to inulin, there's two kinds of inulin. Well, actually, there's a lot more than that, but basically there's inulin from chicory and inulin from artichokes. Well, from chicory, it's 5,000 Daltons, and from artichokes, it's about 8,000 Daltons. So it's the higher molecular weight, which is now more, you're starting to get into the area where the organisms to utilize that need to make an enzyme called inulinase. And that's not something that all bacteria can do. So now, then you go up to like PHGG we talked about before, that's about 20,000 Daltons. That's very specific. So you're talking soluble fiber just from a chicory plant, from the root, the stem, the flower, and the leaf. There's different fibers, and you're eating the whole plant. So you're getting all these different levels of inulin, and boom, you're getting a different bacteria to grow. So what you eat. So if you're talking about the fiber eating diet, you find the specific fibers that have a higher molecular weight or a little bit more dense fiber than the real easy ones that feed just about everybody.
So from a diet standpoint, when you're talking about soluble and insoluble fibers, can you differentiate the different types of foods that people might need to make sure they're focusing on to get some of each of those?
Well, there's a lot of that's a $10 million question, because you've got all different kinds of food. To me, the variety is what really matters.
Whole foods.
You can't whole foods, because in whole foods you've got minerals that are bound into complexes. It's not like you're just taking iron pill, right? You've got iron that's bound up in a complex in your body. That's how it utilizes that iron and uses that iron to, catalase, for instance, needs a lot of iron, right? Mm-hmm. So if it's in the food, you get it one way, but if you take it as a pill, it's going to be a very different thing. So if you get it, cod liver oil, if you're eating liver, things of that sort, you're going to get a lot of different nutrients than you are going to be if you're eating a drumstick. But if we're talking about fibers, you got to eat, fruits, vegetables, and they can be the entire gamut of things. But remember, as human beings, we only could eat what was growing and available at the time. Right. And now you're getting a tomato from Chile in the middle of January that's picked green, hit with ethylene gas, and it looks good. Mm-hmm. But it has no nutritional value. So you can eat all the tomatoes you want. Your body's still craving the selenium that may be in that tomato, or it may be craving the nicotine that's in that tomato.
People hear you say nicotine and they're going, oh my goodness, you can't be talking about nicotine, because they're thinking about nicotine. But nicotine's in foods, and nicotine has a fantastic impact on GI function, GI motility.
Exactly.
We only typically think about the nicotine that's in tobacco-based products, but nicotine is it's a great tool for healthy gut function, right?
Absolutely, it is. And there's nicotine receptors, and if they're filled with nicotine, then other things can't go in there and cause a dysfunction in that particular cell. So it's important, and probably the highest food in, probably the group is going to be your nightshades, green tomatoes, eggplant, red tomatoes. They're probably the highest.
But in a lot of times in functional medicine, what are we telling people that they can't eat?
Nightshades, right? But they're high in nicotine, So you see, no matter which side of the coin you're looking at, there's an argument to be had that this side is better than the other side.
And that's a huge issue, right? Because what we do is we love like linear thinking and linear pathways. I do this, it does this. Versus really what happens is I do this and it affects all of this. Mm-hmm. But that's way too complicated to learn it that way. And so I think we lose a piece of that. We see something and we go, oh, this only does this. No, when you take that, your cells and tissues determined what happens to that. It's nice to say that we get to decide what happens to the micronutrients we take or the food we eat, but our cells, our tissues, our bacteria, and our gut really has the bigger influence. I always say it's like telling your 10-year-old to go clean their room, and then 2 hours later, you're shocked that they didn't clean it. Why didn't they clean it? Because you don't get to choose. The kid gets to choose what they want to do, not you. You can have an idea of what you want to accomplish, but it often doesn't work. It's many times why what somebody thinks is an appropriate supplementation strategy fails to work to really create the change or the benefit they need, because the cells and tissues aren't in a state to really utilize that stuff appropriately. So is it safe to say if somebody's struggling with glucose issues, weight issues, foundationally, the best thing they can do is focus on a whole food based diet with lots of variety? Would that be fair to say?
Yes, but I'm gonna go back, because this is a problem that's going to be very difficult to fix. Is that the food that we eat, no matter whether it's grown organically, if people are composting whatever they're doing, if there's no minerals in the soil, there's no minerals in the plant. Yeah. And if there's no minerals in the plant, there's going to be none in the compost. And so if your body is saying, I need selenium, your body knows what foods are high in selenium. And you say, okay, I'm going to eat this food and I'm going to get selenium, right? But you don't get it. So you have to eat more, because you want it. Your body's saying, I need this much. You talk about women would say when they were pregnant, say, pickles. They wanted pickles, right? They had a craving for pickles. Their body knew what those pickles were going to give them, right? And it might have been the yttrium in the pickles. Who knows what it is, right? But we have cravings. And if we're not getting the satiety in our cells for the minerals that we need, our body's going to say you need to eat more to get more. And if you eat more food to get the selenium, you're getting more calories.
Right. And it's the same thing from the sugar standpoint too, right?
Exactly. Sugar is the same as,
if you've got cell stress going on, if you're in this allostatic state that we talked about, there's decreased glucose transport across the cell membrane. And so those cells, even though you've got a lot of glucose in circulation, they're still needing energy. And so you're still going to get cravings from a brain perspective, which is going to cause you to need to eat more, but you can't break it down, can't utilize it, can't get it into the cell appropriately. So you are bringing in more food calories or food energy calories. But if you can't utilize them, they go into storage. But
they go into storage. Exactly.
You're still going to get the same hit from your brain, but you didn't feed me yet. But you didn't give it to me yet, right?
But it's not always calories. It's not always sugar. It could be as simple as just not enough calcium, not enough iron.
Absolutely.
And so I think I mentioned to you once before this thing called the law of the minimum, where we are not regulated by our total resources as much as we are limited by our scarcest resource, right? So, and here's where supplements become a problem. Everybody hears about how great zinc is for colds, and so they take a ton of zinc. What happens? Reduces their copper. Well, it's a pair, right? And if you reduce the copper, now you have a whole different set of circumstances. Just because you've changed a mineral imbalance, all these other things start the function seems to go this map in the back of inflammation. It's all regulated by minerals.
Yeah.
Yes, and there's hormones that come, but there's enzymes that make things happen, but they require those activators. So, so to me, the fact that over the last 50 years, the amount of minerals in our food has been declining so rapidly, we have to eat more to get the minerals that we need. And therefore, we're getting a ton more calories, which means we're getting a ton more storage. And we're not even figuring out a way to burn off that storage. And just cutting back on food is, like you said, is not the problem, because you can have all the minerals you want, but if they can't get into the cells or where they're needed, that's not going to work. So the system has to be whole.
Yeah, it's a system-wide issue for sure. And when we think about it, we try and manipulate the physiology all the time. We do this in thyroid world all the time. When people see reduced conversion of T4 to T3, they think it's broken physiology, not realizing it's adaptive physiology because of this cell stress physiology. And then they want to put more thyroid hormone into the system, which actually is, if it's T4, it's going to make it even harder to convert T4 to T3. That makes it even harder to get nutrition into the cell. That means you actually are creating a bigger problem in the cell from a nutrient deficiency standpoint. Then we have people saying, well, they're not converting T4 to T3, so I'll just give T3. And they say, this will make it better. But in reality, it actually makes it worse. You're providing more fuel, or we'll call it fuel, but more T3 to the system to drive a metabolism that's already in a downregulated mode, what it can do and often does is it increases some of the mitochondrial action without the other resources or the whole thing working well, and actually creates more oxidative stress, more dysfunction, and it actually just starves the cell because you're chewing up more of the available resources in the cells inappropriately, and you lead to more cell starvation, more cell dysfunction. I would make the argument, and I won't do this in too much depth on this podcast, but adding T3 to somebody who has reduced T4 to T3 conversion can actually make their GLP signaling worse.
Yes.
It's short term. You may get a hit where you're like, oh, everything seems a little bit better, but your body adapts. And the problem is you try to jack the system more in an effort to optimize a lab. You actually make some of the cellular oxidative stress, the cellular inflammation, the micronutrient deficiencies worse, and you actually create more enzyme deficiencies, more brush border enzyme deficiencies, more pancreatic and digestive enzyme deficiencies, and you're actually making the whole process worse.
Doesn't that seem to fit the topic?
Yeah.
Same thing. If you take and push something out of balance, if you're having an endogenous form of GLP-1, there's a counterbalancing system that's got to maintain, right? So if you overload the system in one direction, you're going to be shortchanging the other one. And so so this goes back to your very, very, very first question you asked, right? Why does it stop working? Because you're overloading the system, and it can't counterbalance itself. If that whole process leaves, let's just say, some waste material, and you don't have the ability to get rid of the waste material is going to increase simply because you're overloading the system in a different direction.
Right.
And if you get rid of the waste, that's the oxidation, and whether it's superoxide dismutase or glutathione, you need the catalase system to work. And if you just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and you don't have a way to get rid of the hydrogen peroxide, then it's not going to work. And the same thing, to me, is going on with so many of these other things that work for a while and then they stop. Why? I think you've overloaded the system.
Yeah.
I don't know if pulsing would be a better idea, or working synergistically with other things that might help counterbalance it.
I think a lot of times,
negate it.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when we're trying strategies, pulsing works well because it minimizes the overload at times. But we'll get to that a little bit down the line. I wanted to kind of stay on this topic. If we've got a nutrition issue, right, and we've got a food issue and a nutritional density problem with our food, what's the solution? Right. And some people would say, well, I'm going to eat more organic foods because organic foods are probably raised differently and they don't use pesticides. They still actually use some pesticides. And some of those are potentially more problematic than maybe what we're spraying on the non-organic foods. So I think there's some misinformation there, but I don't want to get somebody to a point where they're listening to this and go, well, there's nothing I can do. So let's give a couple of options and solutions from a food standpoint and support standpoint. We want to eat as much whole food variety. And do you think it's more beneficial? I think we started down this line to eat seasonally, like in your region, in your area, to try and eat more seasonally based versus, doing, bringing stuff up and force ripening it with chemicals when the food's probably at its more, if it's going to be a plant, it's probably in its more toxic level when you're force ripening it than when you're eating it in season.
Yeah. Now we can get into the more esoteric things. If I the 7 generations principle, whatever we do today is going to affect 7 generations to follow, right? If our great grandmother did something, we're still paying that price. So, for instance, they took BPA as just one example. They gave it to pregnant rats, and all of their offspring had abnormally low sperm counts, right? And even though future generations of rats were never exposed to BPA, for the next 5 generations, their sperm counts were abnormally low. So what happened before is epigenetically affecting us today. So can we change that overnight? No, I don't know that we can. What our grandmother did, what our mothers did, what we're doing are going to affect our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. It's just the way it works. So what we can do is we can do the best to make the changes that we need to make within the parameters of what our body will allow us to do. We're all different. You may do really, really well with eggplant. Somebody else may do very, very poorly with eggplant. So you can't just say eat eggplant. Right. It's so individualistic what you have. But getting back to eating local foods, there's a certain level of, especially if you're talking about it being in an area where you've lived for a long time, right? You've kind of tied to the genetics of the area a little bit. So if you're eating food from that area, you're better off. If you get honey from honeybees in your own yard, you're better off than if you get honey from California that's been feeding on almonds. It just makes a lot of sense to me because human beings adapted to their environment. And so they ate what was in their environment, and that helped them adapt even more to their environment, and it became a thing. And so to me, that's a whole different area of things. But again, human beings in this area, northeastern Pennsylvania, 100 years ago could never have had corn on the cob, tomatoes, or anything else that grandma didn't can, other than in August and September. The rest of the time they ate meat and potatoes.
Yeah. And so I'm a firm believer that any diet that you switch to can create some temporary change because you're changing your microbiome. Right. Whether it's good or bad long-term is too early. It's hard to say, but short-term, I think a lot of these things can really make abrupt changes in the gut biome that change symptomatology that may allow somebody to see positive changes and go, oh, okay, my inflammation's better. I feel better. I'm digesting better. But there's still other factors we have to address. So I'm a big believer in the whole food-based diet. Eat it's seasonally when you can. It's interesting. And obviously we're a different species. So I had this conversation with somebody the other day and I said, what's interesting is like, as a hunter, right? I'm looking at the bears on my camera and what are they doing? They're eating everything right now, right? We kind of do things differently as humans, especially in today's world. We underconsume during the summer because we want to look good. We want to have ripped abs and all these things. And then in the winter time, we typically less physical activity, overconsumption, and it seems like it's opposite of nature, right? What we see a lot of times, especially for animals, is they're feeding the most when it's sunny, summer, food's available. And then in the wintertime, they're eating, they have a limitation of resources and they're thinning down. Is there anything to that from your perspective that maybe how we feast, no famine, mostly feast, and maybe we're working against maybe some of the normal biologic cycles of human physiology and maybe bacterial physiology?
Yeah, and you're also introducing a very different genetic composition. So a tomato grown in Chile is is going to be growing in soil that has bacteria. Well, suppose maybe. Maybe it's just NPK that they're feeding it to get it to be this little green thing that they put on a plane and ship up here. You know, you need to have bacteria in the soil that are going to move the nutrients, minerals into the plant, and then the animals are going to eat the plant and get their nutrition that way. If we just go and till it, we kill it, and then we're just required to give it just salts to get it to look, you know, good to eat. And so you're not getting the real genetics of the food, if you will, that your body can utilize. And so if you're growing locally, you're going to get local genetics from, you know, because that's what's there. That's what, if you walk outside and you're bare feet and you get some stuff on your hands, you go like that, you're getting bacteria from the ground into your system. And the genetics of those organisms are going to have an impact on your GI tract and epigenetically upon you. Again, it's a huge system. So I'm a real proponent. You know, we buy from CSA every year. It's grown, you know, 3 miles from my house, and you know, I have my own garden where I grow the things that I want to grow. I do companion planting so that we get, you know, the best nutritional value we can out of the plants, and that's where you're going to get your healthiest. You know, but if you're you know, going to go down to that fast food place that's the same in Hong Kong as it is over here, you know, it's going to be too much homogeneity.
Yeah. So we've got to eat healthier whole foods. That's step one. Step two, less processed foods, because the less processed food, the more processed food, more sugars, more chemicals, more everything in it. And we won't even, you know, the pesticide conversation is complex, so we won't even get into that. Just try and eat locally, try and eat in season, try and eat a large variety of whole foods. And I think it wouldn't matter what condition you have. This is probably a better way to eat. When it comes to bacteria, and you know, some people would be thinking, okay, well, if I have imbalances of the bacteria in my gut, and that's potentially leading to problems in short chain fatty acids and problems in GLP-1 production, why don't I just take a probiotic? So there are now people are promoting probiotics that are for GLP-1 probiotics. You see these things starting to come out. So I think we need to have a little bit of conversation regarding, are probiotics beneficial? Are they beneficial on their own? Do we need to, are there certain types of probiotic bacteria that are more beneficial to help? And do we need to feed them, whether it's from real food or potentially supplementation with like fibers to help them grow? And I think sometimes people think that they'll just take this probiotic forever. Is that the right strategy? Or are probiotics like temporarily helping the police maintain order? And then if we're doing a lot of the right lifestyle habits, behaviors, diet, nutrition, should we be able to not need a probiotic on a regular basis? Or do you think because of the way food and nutritional quality is today, that a lot of people might benefit from more long-term probiotic use?
Again, yes, I think depends on the individual. You can probably, you know, do well with a maintenance dose. You don't need to take it every day. You know, if you've got one that's got the ability to get through the stomach and colonize, you know, just throwing a bug in a pill does not call it a probiotic. Mm-hmm. You know, it really doesn't. You know, but if we eat the right foods, we're going to feed the right bugs. We've said that before. If you've got the wrong bugs, you can do some things that are going to help counterbalance that. Taking a probiotic can help do that. But what are the things that are really going to impact your microbiome? How about stress? Mm-hmm. Now, if we get rid of stress, well, we're going to save the microbiome. Well, how do we get rid of stress, right? Taking antibiotics. That's going to have an impact on your microbiome, right? But if you have an infection, you may need to have an antibiotic. Birth control pills, right? They're going to affect the gut, but if you don't take them, you may end up with an unwanted pregnancy. There's so many things that affect our gut that are external to just the food that we eat, that you have to maintain those things. So that's where your book comes in so handy, because you've got all these fitness factors that can address all these different areas that can then help the microbiome. But a little boost is not going to hurt. So if you have an overgrowth of one thing, a probiotic might help. But you have to be careful with in certain instances. Like for most healthy people, it really doesn't make that much difference. But somebody's going to a doctor because they have an issue. Like if they have these are bad words from the FDA standpoint, but if somebody has a lot of inflammation and you take a probiotic that's going to make more inflammatory cytokines, is that going to be a good thing?
Probably not.
If you can't handle D negative lactic acid and you take a probiotic that makes D negative lactic acid, is that going to be a good thing? No. So just, and if you just say, I've taken a probiotic, it's these spore formers, and it's just Bacillus subtilis, right? One increases TNF alpha, another strain decreases it. One increases in interferon gamma, another one decreases it. Which one are you taking? You don't even know what you're doing if you don't know what the organisms can do when you take it.
Yeah.
So there's some knowledge that has to go into your choices.
Well, I think generally people just think a probiotic is a probiotic. They don't not necessarily realize there's different strains that do different things. Some don't play well together. We've talked about that in the past. Right. So you can just throw a bunch of bacteria in a capsule, but you may not get much value out of it if they don't play well together. Right. And still, I think the probiotics, and to be fair, everybody, I use a lot of Jeff's probiotics to help my clients, but it's not necessarily the long-term strategy for people. And Jeff hinted at this, is there's so many things that influence gut physiology. And foundationally for me, when we are in homeostasis, gut function is great. We don't really have issues. Our blood sugar regulates well. We sleep well. We function well. We maintain weight well. Our thyroid numbers look good. Our inflammation's low. We feel and function good. The problem today, and Jeff kind of kept hinting at this, is that we have higher levels of stress on our physiology, real and perceived. And when we don't allow for recovery from those stressors, we shift into this cell stress, cell danger physiology, what we call allostatic regulation. And when we shift into allostatic regulation, we downregulate our parasympathetic system, our gut hormones, our enzymes are downregulated. Most of the ones that help us with digestion. The things that are upregulated are the immune inflammatory mechanisms. Why? Because the body is perceiving threat or danger. Right. And if you stay in that mode, and I'm sure you and I have talked about this before, like people do, I'm going to do a 30-day gut protocol, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Why doesn't it work? Well, it can manage signs and symptoms temporarily, but if the state of the person hasn't changed, as soon as that supplementation goes away, they're going to be right back to the same.
Right back to where they started.
So ultimately, I think we're both in agreement. We have to identify and address the excessive stress load or perceived stress load. And unfortunately, sometimes people are like, well, how am I going to get rid of stress? You're not going to get rid of stress. But a big part of it is, how are you perceiving your life, your environment, your relationships, all of these things? What's going on between the 6 inches of your ears? If somebody has poor relationship fitness and they're arguing with their spouse every day, they shouldn't be shocked that they have signs and symptoms of hypothyroidism, signs and symptoms of gut dysfunction, right? Gas, bloating, pressure, constipation, problems with insomnia, because they're with that person 8, 10, 12, 14 hours a day ongoing, and they're not happy with that person. That creates fear, it creates anxiety, downregulates hormone regulation, gut physiology. There's not enough supplements in the world to fix that. They can manage it temporarily, but it's a just like medications, they're both expensive management tools when in reality, you have everything you need to really address it, which is how do I identify the stressors that's creating my stress load? How do I improve my level of fitness in these different categories? Well, I don't sleep at night. That has a huge impact on your gut biome if you don't sleep. So instead of taking a probiotic as I'll just take a probiotic because I have gut issue. How about you work on your sleep habits, your sleep behavior, and start addressing that? And if you improve your sleep health and your sleep quality, your sleep fitness, you may find, hey, my gut works better, right?
Yeah, exactly. I would have to say that the hardest lesson that I had to learn in my life had to do with stresses, right? And it comes down to simple, right? Worry only about the things that you can control. Mm-hmm. If you can't control it, don't worry about it. So all it's going to do is cause worry and stress. But if you can do something about it, then you fix it.
Right.
Right. It's entirely up to what's in that 6 inches between your head. If what somebody says bothers you, it's going to cause stress, right? But you can't change what they're going to say, what they're going to think, what they're going to do. You can't change that.
Yeah.
You may be able to influence it with certain things, but you can't change it. A lot of things. So don't worry about them. If you don't worry about them, then that's going to take a huge amount of stress off.
And people say like, hey, what's creating stress in my life is, my family member died, my partner died, right? Like, yeah, I'm sad, but I can stay with this sadness and the anger, which then does what? It upregulates my fight or flight system, my limbic system, and that's going to downregulate the parasympathetics. It's not that we don't miss that person, but we could reframe it as well. Like,
right.
You know what?
Exactly.
I miss my partner, my wife, my whatever. Just say, you know what? Instead of dwelling on the fact that being angry because they're not here and being sad they're not here, I could focus on all the good times I had, the benefits they brought me, the lessons I learned. And you can remember those good times. And now that same thing, the loss of somebody, even though there's a hole in your heart for that person, you've taken that bad situation and reframed it into something that can be positive. Mm-hmm. And that's going to have a huge impact on your overall physiology. It's not about the stress. I say this to patients and I get grief from them. They're like, you don't know what I'm going through. Like everybody has a story to tell.
Right.
But it's how we frame the situation. Are we reframing it? Are we framing it as a negative and carrying that around like a backpack through life? Or are we reframing the situation like that sucked, but what can I learn from this experience? How can I move forward so that I can use this as a tool to be stronger, to be more resilient? Because stress is needed, right? We need stress on our gut physiology. That's why when people say plants are bad, well, yeah, plants have toxins in them, but if you don't have some level of stimulation of the immune system of the gut, how is it going to be helpful when you really have a more problematic bacteria overgrowth or some dysbiosis? You have to have a healthy immune system. The only way you get a healthy immune system is to get exposed to things that are going to stimulate the immune system. It's why we lift weights. Why do I lift weights? Somebody could say, well, it's bad because it breaks your muscle tissue down. Well, it does, but if I allow for recovery and have good nutrition, right, I have a bigger, stronger, more resilient muscle. And now where I could only lift 5 pounds before, now I can lift 30 pounds. That stress with the right recovery allows me to actually be stronger and more resilient. And that's really the message for all of this stuff. Like, you're never going to get rid of the stress. You're never going to have the cleanest food. You're never going to have the perfect nutrition probably from the tomato anymore because of everything that goes on. So you want to do, my opinion is, you want to do the best you can to raise your level of fitness in all these categories, especially those foundational 5, so that you have a stronger foundation, you're more resilient, you're more tolerant of other stressors that come into your life, so it doesn't sink you as well. And it's not like you're going to be always perfect in these things. Improving your level of health and your level of fitness in all these fitness categories is like jacking up your house, right? If you're a 3 out of 10 for your emotional fitness, you're not going to fix that overnight, and you can't ignore everything else just while you work on that, because now you're not eating well, you're not sleeping well, because I'm trying to fix my emotional well-being, right? Instead, you would, just like you were jacking up your house, you'd put a jack on each corner, jack it an inch. Like, I'd work on my emotional fitness. Now I'm going to go over here, work on my dietary fitness, improve that. Now I'm going to go over here, work on my physical fitness. Now I'm going to go over here and work on my mindset fitness. Now I'm going to go over here and work on my sleep. And it's this incremental improvement of all of these areas that's going to get you your perceived stress level down, which is then going to allow your sympathetic system to calm, your parasympathetic system to start to work better. You'll be able to shift out of allostatic fight or flight regulation into more homeostatic regulation. And now glucose regulates better. GLP-1 works better. Your gut flora is better. And this is when the supplementation strategies actually work, because when we're in chronic cell stress, we're not in a healing and recovery mode. We're in a patch, right. and we that stress causes reduced cell-to-cell communication when you're in excessive stress. The cells don't communicate with it. How are they going to heal? How are they going to repair? How are you going to maintain tight junctions when the GI tract is chronically inflamed or the body is chronically inflamed?
Right. Well, you also have to remember that, like you're talking about jacking up the house, if your jack's not on a strong foundation, it's going to push the jack down into the ground. It's not going to lift the house. Yeah. So you have to have that strong foundation. And there are more signals going from your gut to your brain than from your brain to your gut. So that gut-brain axis, is really to me, a foundational part of things, which means you need to have a good, solid, healthy microbiome as the basis of most everything. 5 pounds of you is bacteria, and there's so many more of them than there are of you, and they do so many more things than we do, that determine what we do and how we've gotten along over the millennia comes from our gut health.
So we want to, as we start to kind of wind down on this topic, I don't think I got fully everywhere where I wanted to go on it, but that's okay. That's why we do the podcast the way we do it and just kind of let it roll. But I want people to walk away with strategies from your opinion, especially as somebody who makes enzymes and makes probiotics as their business. And it's important to know for the listeners, I've worked with Jeff for a while now. One thing I really like about Jeff and his company is there's not this drive like the solution is my product, right? This is the only solution. It is more about strategy than it is about supplementation. And that's what I like. And that's been the bulk of the conversation today. But there are things that we potentially, especially when we're under a lot of stress, that can potentially be beneficial as we work on improving these fitness factors that can help. So strategically, from your opinion, what are like the 5 big tips that you would recommend for somebody who realizes I'm not in homeostasis, I'm in allostasis, I've got to reduce my stress load? What are the 5 big tips that you might suggest for them as they start to try and gain their health back and shift from allostasis to homeostasis? Whether it's, we talked about some diet and lifestyle things, but whatever your top 5 recommendations would be, let's hear them.
Okay. Well, as I'm going, my mind is racing in 1,000 different directions. Now I got to pull it back down to just 5 little simple things. Okay. So we've talked about the quality of food. So it's not just what you eat, but it's what you digest. And then it's not just what you digest, but what you assimilate and what you eliminate that matters. Right. So we are not healthcare providers. Our philosophy has always been, we will make the best possible product. I don't care about the cost. We'll make the best possible product that you, the healthcare provider, can give to your patients to get the best result possible for the shortest period of time. So originally, when we came up with our first probiotic, we had a system. We said you take 1 a day for 2 weeks and then 2 a week to maintain. Right? At 2 a week, we were delivering through the stomach enough bacteria to meet the requirements of the scientific papers at the time of each of those organisms. So what did we do? We made it so that we could get the bacteria through the stomach. And we chose the ones that would be the best to have the ability to adhere and stick around. And we did things to wake them up that other people don't do, right? So we made a probiotic that would be optimal for what you as a healthcare provider need to give to the patient based upon what you think that they need. Right now, if you need, some upregulation of the immune system, or if you need downregulation of the immune system, that could be two different probiotics completely. It's not just one size doesn't fit all. But at the same time, we also realized I don't need a probiotic for 13-year-old boys with pimples and another one for 80-year-old men who've got an extra 20 pounds on their belly. We don't make probiotics that are marketing driven. Right? They're just strictly science driven. On the enzyme side, we also know that certain enzymes are not able to get through the stomach because the stomach's a barrier. So we made an enzyme that would get more of the acid sensitive enzymes through, which was probably not as good for digesting proteins because that needs the good stomach acid to do that. And then we have other ones that are better for maybe protein digestion. But they all need a mineral, so we put 75 minerals in there. So what we tried to do was make the things that are going to help your microbiome the most effective, and let the healthcare provider take the choice of which one to do and how often and when. I always say to people, if you're going to start on a probiotic that you think is going to be strong, take one, wait a day, take another one, wait a day. And then take 2 days in a row. And if you don't have any problems, you're not going to have a problem. If you're going to have a problem the first day, you're going to have a problem the first day because those probiotics are strong. They can make a significant alteration in your GI tract if you've got the bacteria in there that are going to be impacted by the strains that you're giving them. And like roadkill, they're just going to stink and die until they're excreted and gotten rid of. And so people can get that die off kind of a thing. So, so I'm always cautious in taking things. So I guess those would be the real main things. But then the last part to me is the systemic enzyme part. So many people, aren't familiar with, they figure the enzymes are just to help you break down food, but systemic enzymes get into your bloodstream and they can do so many different things to help circulatory health, recovery, things of that sort. And now we have base 3 products that are now Informed Sport, and it goes into that same philosophy. So we have a digestive enzyme that's Informed Sport. We have a probiotic that's Informed Sport, and a systemic enzyme that are Informed Sport, which just means they've been tested for 250 possible contaminants that's going to cause an athlete to fail a drug test.
Yeah,
right. Well, the extra step, but that's the 3 major things that we're looking at, because like I talked about assimilation and elimination, but there's a lot of people who have issues with unwanted proteins getting into their bloodstream because the intestinal barrier is not as strong as it should be. Well, systemic enzymes can help clean that up. But that's our philosophy.
Yeah. So I'll jump in there and kind of add some things. So what Jeff's company has is they have these digestive and systemic enzymes. They do different things, really important, but these are great strategies that can be helpful when you're in that crisis mode, because what the digestive enzyme is going to do is it's going to help you break down your food better. What most people don't realize, I think, is that when they're in this excessive stress, allostatic regulatory mode, you're not making stomach acid effectively. You're not making digestive enzymes. You're not making breast border enzymes. You're not making these effectively. So even if you ate the healthiest foods, you're not going to break them down well because your body's just not producing them. If you've got reduced T4 to T3 conversion, you're not making these things. If you've got signs and symptoms of tissue hypothyroidism, you're not making these things. So taking digestive enzymes, acid support can help you break down the foods better. And that's really what you need help breaking some of this stuff down, because if you don't have good motility and you're putting all that stuff in and you have dysbiosis, you're going to have problems. And if you didn't have dysbiosis, but you have decreased digestion and decreased motility, it's only probably a matter of time until you have dysbiosis,
until you have the problems,
right? So these are they're great products, super clean, which is really good. But I think this is a tool, and my opinion is that if you are, when we're thinking about food, nutrition, and things like that, I typically tell people, number one, eat the best quality food you can afford. Number two, because we tend to live in a world where we have more stress on our physiology, number two would be take some digestive enzyme support, obtain HCl, digestive enzymes, because you need help breaking it down. There's really no downside to taking things that are going to help break the food down. You're actually helping the body conserve some energy, and you're helping that gut flora stuff. As far as the probiotics, probiotic, Jeff probably won't want to get into this, but I'll get into this a bit. The probiotic market is a bit messy. There's a lot of stories that are told. Many of them probably not true. And probiotics can be beneficial. Probiotics can be potentially problematic. So I think when you're thinking about what probiotic should I use, can I take? Yeah, sure. You can become your own doctor. But this is, again, sometimes a place where I typically try and get people to work on the life and the lifestyle factors, the habits, the behaviors. And when it comes to supplementation, especially when you're trying to do something more targeted, I think this is where working with a functional practitioner really can be much more helpful for you, because there are products that you'd say, okay, I'm in a crisis mode. I've got loose stools. I can't get this managed. That one probiotic may help you see recovery much faster, or some stability much faster than something else. If you've got challenges with low short chain fatty acid production, certain probiotics are going to be more beneficial to help you make some of those while you're trying to address all these stressors. So that I'm not a huge fan of people. You could do anything you want, but this stuff is complicated. And when you start spending money on good quality supplements, and they're not inexpensive to do, you want to be doing it strategically. And that's my model for supplementation. I don't like people taking a lot of stuff, but if foundationally, I think the digestive enzymes, probiotics can be beneficial. I'd say, if you experiment, you experiment, but when you start to try and do something targeted, you really need to have a knowledge base behind that. And then the systemic enzymes, I agree with Jeff. This is something nobody really talks about. I just had a conversation with a client who's got a clotting issue going on, and they're going to put the person on Eliquis. But man, you could use systemic enzymes to do the same job while we figure out what's causing the clotting, right? Without some of the side effects.
Well, sure. I mean, if you go back in a long time, looking at what the Japanese eat, they eat natto, right? Which is fermented soy, right? Well, it's fermented because of some bacteria, right? Which produce an enzyme, and they take that enzyme, which is called nattokinase, which breaks down fibrin, and fibrin is part of a clot, So there's a line that can be drawn between those things, and not necessarily. I'm not talking about any product. I'm talking about the structure and function of a particular enzyme. Serrapeptidase comes from a bacterium that's in the gut of a silkworm larva, right? And that will help clean brush border sites. I mean, anybody, with a computer these days, and even a small bit of knowledge can Google certain things, but I've gotten away from that almost entirely, and using I hate to say it, AI, but you can find out a lot more information now if you ask the right questions. You can get a lot of good information on specific strains, and I'm not saying this so much for the consumer as I am for the healthcare practitioner. Example, 2 strains of Bifidobacterium lactis, one will degrade oxalates, the other one won't. 2 strains of Acidophilus, one will inhibit E. coli, the other one won't. But there's so many different things that each one of these things does separately, that it's hard to say for any one particular patient, this is what it is. To me, the ideal would be to have a compounding pharmacy that could say, all right, You, the practitioner, say, I want to have this many billion CFU of this organism, this one, this one, and this one, you know, and deliver to a patient. But that would require somebody having an inventory of thousands of different bacteria, you know, and 1,000 different, you know, options coming in. So you have to kind of pick the ones, pick and choose. So our preference has always been to take bacteria that are of human origin, so that that's where they're coming from. So putting them back is probably going to have the least deleterious effect than taking it from an octopus, say, you know. So we're taking those and we're getting them through the stomach, and they can do the things that they do.
So we've suggested that, hey, whole food based diet with lots of variety, trying to eat in season. Possibly, if you know you're in this kind of cell stress allostatic regulation, potentially some systemic and digestive enzymes are things that can help you without knowing much, right? Because they're going to help break down your food and break down some of the some of the proteins that leave the gut that shouldn't leave the gut, or peptides that leave the gut that shouldn't leave the gut. And it can deal with some of the systemic inflammation, fibrin, things like that. Those things can be beneficial. The other things to me that are really important to improve your health, your well-being, your thyroid physiology is working on the fitness factors. Like you just can't get away from working on improving your sleep quality, your relationships, your mindset, your habits. And as I tell people all the time, that you should not strive to be perfect. That in itself, I think, is one of the biggest stressors in the client base that I see, is people trying to be perfect. I want to have the perfect this, the perfect that, perfect this. I'm like, and what you're creating when you don't get perfection is more stress on your physiology. So you have to find balance. 80-20 gets thrown around, like 80% good habits, 20% bad behavior, in my opinion, is where happiness is. Because you don't feel like you're restricting yourself. Don't feel like you can't have fun with somebody, eat your birthday cake because it's your birthday. But if you spend 80% of your time working on your sleep, your relationship with your spouse, your partner, working on good respiratory behavior, like Jeff, we didn't get into this. I did a podcast the other day with a gynecologist, and we talked about the improving bowel function and pelvic floor function by sniffing, right? Because just sniffing activates that anal wink reflex. And something as simple as restoring appropriate breathing can improve bowel movement and bowel motility. If you improve bowel movement and bowel motility because of better respiration, you're going to improve your gut biome. Just doing these things, it's so complex. And so instead of trying to find the right magic probiotic or the magic supplement that's going to fix it, I think we should be using them strategically. Probably there's some things many people could just add on their own, like a digestive enzyme or systemic enzyme. But when it gets down to the other stuff, this is where I think your best value is. Really, you can work on all these fitness factor pieces, but somebody who really understands the chemistry can save you a ton of money and a waste of money on lots and lots of supplements. It's not about buying more supplementation and putting it in. It's about doing these things strategically.
You're saying the same thing but I'm going to say it in a different way. What did Mother Nature want us to do? You know, if we look at what Mother Nature intended for us and we try to emulate that, that's going to be the closest we're going to get to it. I think human health has gone downhill since we put rubber on the bottom of our shoes.
Possibly. Yeah. There's pros and cons for sure. But I think we've lost touch with nature to a large degree.
We have, right.
And the further we get away from it, the more health generally declines, happiness declines, our overall well-being declines. So
you got to get those energy levels right, all of them, Yeah. And those are all your fitness factors, all play into all of those different things. It's amazing when you read, the thyroid debacle and you get into those fitness factors, how, if you really think about it, how they influence every single system of our body is regulated by those very same things. As soon as we're done with here, the wife and I are going to the gym to work out today. It's, you have to do that, it's cold, rainy day. Walking in the woods is a little bit more problematic now because of the mud and age and everything else. I don't want to fall. So now I go to the gym, but on sunny days, I'm back out in the woods. We got to get that exercise, and that helps you sleep.
Yeah.
If you sleep better, then your gut works better. If your gut works better, everything starts to work better.
Yeah. It sounds like we're saying the same thing over and over again, but that's because those things are the things that fix it. It's not the stuff. As much as I use your products and you sell products, and the secret is not in that bottle. That is a great management. It's a tool. It's not the tool. You have to do the life and the lifestyle factors to a high degree if you want to have a high level of health.
Right. I mean, but you get as simple as hydrochloric acid in the stomach. If you don't have it, proteins don't break down. And now you have a litany of problems from circulatory health, low energy, low oxygen levels. So many things happen just because the stomach acid wasn't right.
Yeah.
And proteins didn't break down.
Small things turn into big things. Like it's, what do they say? Every tidal wave starts with a ripple, right? So anyway, I got to let you go. We got to wrap this up. It's been an hour and a half. Time goes fast. Tell everybody what the names of the companies. So if they're interested in learning more about Jeff and your companies, what the companies are.
Well, let's use the websites. usenzymes.com is our website for our more professional products. So for any healthcare providers that people coming in and seeing them in their office, it doesn't matter whether you're a massage therapist or a neurosurgeon, right? You're a healthcare provider. We have that level, and then we have our consumer-based level that got to where it was because of Amazon long ago. So we kind of left that out there, and that's master-supplements.com.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the two. So you can go and see the products that you can just buy, anybody can buy, or if you're a healthcare provider, you can go over to the US Enzymes side.
Yeah. And if you're working with a healthcare provider and they don't use some of those products, you may want to find out, hey, are these products that you're aware of? And maybe these are things that with their help that you can start to utilize from the professional side of things. And they're definitely high quality products. I use them day in, day out with clients. And I only use what works. So his product line is something I use every day. So Jeff, thanks for coming back on the Thyroid Answers podcast. We got into stuff. I have like half of my sheet here. I didn't even get those questions asked, but that's okay. We got a discussion of gut function, gut physiology, how gut physiology plays a role with GLP-1. And I guess the final parting thought would be, if you're a person who's struggling with weight issues, struggling with inflammation, struggling with thyroid issues, blood sugar issues, and you're considering, like a GLP-1 medication, just know that your body makes GLP-1 on its own. And there's multiple factors that are contributing to its either decreased production or decreased functionality. And adding more exogenous GLP-1 can change things in your physiology. But there's a high risk of things becoming problematic as a result of trying to overwhelm the system. And two, at the end of the day, you haven't addressed what caused the problem to begin with. So at some point, you're going to become a slave to the GLP-1, or you're going to come off of it. And if you still have the same dysfunction, you're going to have happen. What happens to a lot of people is they start to gain weight back. And not only do they gain weight back, they actually gain more weight back because they have less muscle mass to address, to support their physiology. So hope this helped. Jeff, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. And I'm sure we'll have another conversation soon.
I hope so. Thanks, Doc.